What's up, Gator Nation? Welcome to the Geo Recruiting Show. Zach Albaverdi here with Keith Niebuhr and Corey Bender. And we've got a lot to discuss on the recruiting front. The Gators landed a commit this past week. They had one of their top targets shut down their recruitment as well. And then they also had somebody make a surprising decision as well this week. We'll get into all of that, what's happening on the quarterback front. I know you guys want to know about that. So we'll get into all of it with Keith and Corey. And we'll start with kind of an overview of Florida's class right now. They enter July with 8 commitments. They've got a lot of decisions coming up. They've landed some guys in the past week. So there's a lot to follow and a lot to discuss here. Keith, what do you want to start with?
Well, I mean, you're looking at Florida heading into July. We're on July 3rd now. 8 commitments. Picked up 4 new guys in the 2025 class in June. So the question is, how many can they get in August? And I set the over-under at like 2.5 in that range. And I think they can go over that. But that being said, they're in a lot of recruitments where we don't necessarily think they're the favorite. So it's going to be an uphill climb in July, I think. I want to temper everybody's expectations. We've said this all along. You're going to have to be patient if you're a Florida fan this cycle because kids are not rushing. And we could see this pretty early in the cycle. Kids were just not rushing to join the class. Now, look, Florida could have taken a bunch of guys. Florida could already have 15, 20 commitments right now. But they are going after some high-level guys, and then they'll circle back if they need to. But I do think if you're a Florida fan, you've got to exhibit some patience. It's not going to be easy, and you're probably going to have to wait to see what happens during the course of the season. Kids are going to have to continue to visit, and you're going to have to hope that the team plays well and that the NIL coffers fill up. And there's a lot of dynamics in play, but so many prospects have said, hey, they want to see the product on the field. Now, unfortunately for Florida, a few of those guys said that and then set announcements for the summer. So we don't know what that means. But in this day and age, you never know. Somebody's really not off the board unless you take them off the board. Just because a guy commits to another school, you're still going to keep recruiting them if you want them. So I don't think that with Florida, we're seeing 8 commitments and we're seeing guys committing to other schools like a kid yesterday, Tavon Wallace. And if you're Florida, your board really doesn't change. If you really want a guy, you're going to continue to recruit him. So there's just a lot of dynamics in play. We expect, a half dozen to 10 guys are going to announce that are on Florida's high on Florida's board in July. So they're probably going to pick up a few guys. The question is how many,
No doubt. CB, we can't hear you.
Thanks. Sorry about that. I double clicked it. I just think it's that mixture. I think, like Keith said, going into that crucial year 3, I mean, we kind of were told people back in January, this is the one sucker you have to be patient with. I think it's a mixture. Is obviously where Florida's program is. A lot of people want to see how Florida plays in the fall. I know that's a big thing. But also the other thing is just where the program is right now. They want to see results on the field. And then, you have these highly ranked kids. A lot of these kids want to take all their OVs, kind of regroup with their family and then make a decision. And that's really what the month of July and August are for. So, like Keith noted, we have a lot of guys coming off the board here soon, but unfortunately for Florida, we view them as on the outside looking in for some key targets. So it'll be interesting next couple of weeks. Obviously we're in the dead period, but a lot of key guys will be coming off the board, and we'll highlight those guys here soon.
Zach, I just don't think there's going to be this huge rush of commitments. And we've said that for the last several weeks. It's going to be a class that's sort of piecemealed together. And that's what I mean by exhibiting patience. So you got Vernell Brown announcing, Vernell Brown III, the 5-star receiver, is going to be announcing probably sometime in July. If you get him, that's another big piece of the puzzle, right? That's another big piece of your offensive puzzle. So slowly putting it together. You already have 2 running backs committed. You have 2 tight ends committed. That would give you a second receiver commit. So there's just not going to be this rush, we don't think. You do have a bunch of guys announcing over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And if Florida can just get even 3 or 4 of those guys, then I think, okay, you're looking at going into the season or going into fall camp, which is a dead period, with 11 or 12 commitments, let's say. And that's not terrible because when you think about it, they only signed, I think, 19 to 20 guys the last cycle. So that means you can just add a guy here or there during the fall, pick up a couple guys late, and you've got your class. It's just not going to be what we saw last June was all these kids officially visiting, all these guys jumping on board. committing, and then all of a sudden Florida's class was in the top 10, top 5 at times. But the negative of that is then you had a few guys flip late, okay? So sometimes it's better to be the pursuer than the team that's trying to hold on to guys. And
Sure.
so we'll see what happens. Now, the question is, a lot of people on the Florida staff, we'll bump into them, hey, we just got to win. We just got to win. And they feel like things are going to really fall into place. But that's a dangerous game to play. It's the only game they can play right now. But it is still somewhat dangerous because what is the amount of wins that gets a recruit to give you a second look, that gets the NIL booster to say, all right, I'm going to give them a lot more money so they can go get this guy. What is the number of wins that makes people feel good about the program? Is it 6? I don't know that a bunch of recruits jump on in the boat or want to jump in the boat with 6. 7, well, against that schedule, not too bad, but I still don't know. None of us do what excitement level that produces. 8, I think you say 8 wins. I don't know how anybody could look at that schedule and say that's a bad thing. I think that's one that they can get some momentum with on many different levels. I mean, look, guys, Corey and Zach, if we're all major donors and we're looking at them and we're not, obviously, and you say, all right, they need NIL money. They can close strong, but I got to see something. What are we going to get from our money?
I think to your point, Keith, one thing that could sway recruits and the donors that you just spoke of, you got to win in the swamp.
Yeah.
Right? You got to win some of these big games that are coming up against Miami. If you can get a win at home against LSU, an upset against Ole Miss, which, that seems like probably the hardest one to get done. But there's some games that they can do to appease, I think, a lot of folks. Beating Kentucky at home, ending that losing streak.
Yeah.
Like these are some things that just have to happen. And that could maybe sway how a lot of people feel.
I think also, too, is what quiets the noise if Florida does, lose, unfortunately. If they do go through a little streak and they lose some games, we all know what the outside noise can be with the fan base, just national. I think that could also kind of scare some recruits or keep them off. I also think that's going to be a key, too, is if Florida kind of has a few skids throughout the season and maybe they go lose 2 in a row, how can they manage that noise from the outside to convince recruits, hey, this is still a place you want to be? Because even when Josh Moore, I know when Keith spoke to him before he committed, that was one of the main topics he spoke with Napier was his job security and that noise on the outside and, hey, everything's going to be okay. This is our program and everything's kind of, people are kind of happy with the program where it's at right now. But I just don't see – I think there's going to be a lot of challenges throughout the fall, man. I think that Miami game is going to be so key just from a momentum standpoint and recruiting. We know – 0-0, 2 in-state schools, even if they're not necessarily considering Florida that heavily, they're not like a top 3, top 5, you're still going to have those elite 5-star kids on the sideline, you would think, for that game. I just think that game is so crucial from recruiting and for that locker room.
Well, so we've heard some boosters that we know say, hey, look, 7 wins, obviously, no, be safe. 6 wins, probably safe. 5 wins, you never know. What if they look better? Of course, then I say, if you won 5 games, how much better did you look? You know what I mean? But the question is, how many wins not only impresses recruits and donors, but also this. Here's the thing that you got to think of. If you win 6 and you save your job, but that means you probably go into next season on the hot seat again, too. You're not really giving yourself much of a cushion there. So, and then that would mean that this cycle would be a challenge to finish in the top 15, let's say, and then you already go into the next recruiting cycle on the hot seat again. And once you get on the hot seat, we don't know whether Billy Napier's on the hot seat or not, but we know the perception is that he's on the hot seat, and the perception becomes the reality out in the ether, right? And so if he's perceived to be on the hot seat, it would make it difficult. Even for next year, even if you say, all right, he survived this year, but he's going to go into next season on the hot seat, it would make it difficult to finish with a bang this year. And then obviously you'd be facing some of the same challenges next year. So look, the great medicine to all this is just, go out and beat Miami, beat Texas and win some games, look good. DJ Lagway, we know, is going to play a role in this team. Have him play, have him do well, get people excited about the future. And then young guys are going to say, look, that's what I want to be a part of.
Yeah, I think a grand opening and a grand closing, Keith, if you can open the season with a win at Miami or against Miami, and close the season with a win at Florida State, you're, getting a win over your 2 biggest in-state rivals. If that puts you at 7 wins or maybe even potentially 8 with a bowl game, now you're going into 2025 with some momentum. And, DJ Lagway, like you mentioned, is the starting quarterback. There's a lot of excitement centered around that. So, so much of that, I think, will be determined by what happens this fall and how those guys do. So, but before we get to that point, we've got some decisions coming up. A lot of guys that are getting ready to announce. Before we, get into a rundown, I want to ask you guys, who are some of the most important decisions coming up this month? Guys that are deciding that you feel are like near the top of Florida's board that they really, really need to do their best job to land.
I guess I'll go, Corey, if you don't mind. Corey may agree or disagree, but to me, it's Vernell Brown. Because one, he's a the third. Well, there you go. One, he's a 5-star player. Now, I mean, that rankings are subjective, but what that tells you, one, he's very good. 2, he's a guy that can play early on. 3, he's a legacy. 4, he's got the name recognition nationally. That would kind of get people saying, all right, look, man, this staff is 11-14 going into year 3, but this guy feels enough confidence in them to go and commit to the Florida Gators. And a legacy or not, if he didn't feel that confidence, he wouldn't be going there. And that can help with other recruits. Okay. Now you would have landed him. You would have landed Joshua Moore. You've got Galen Wiggins, another top 100 recruit at the edge position. And then other recruits may say, all right, look, you know what? Maybe I don't need to wait as long as I thought. These guys feel comfortable with it. Let's get in there and let's do it. Let's change this program around. So to me, so much revolves around Vernell Brown III, whom we think is going to make a decision in July. And again, if you get him, then all of a sudden you've got that 1 5-star on the board. You're not sitting in the 40s in the rankings. I mean, it would cure a lot of the ills and make people feel. And now, granted, a lot of fans are going to say, wait a second, this should be a layup. He's a legacy. But that doesn't always work that way. It just doesn't always. I've seen a lot of legacies go to other schools. Okay?
I mean, didn't he come out at one point and say Ohio State and Florida were his favorites?
He is.
Pretty sure he did that after the FSU visit, one of his FSU visits.
At one point, Zach, Ohio State was getting crystal ball picks. So this has been a battle. So it would be a significant win. There you go. There's another. Thank you, Zach. It'd be a win over Ohio State, which is wide receiver U. It'd be a win over Florida State, which is
they just lost the battle with Ohio State against with their receiver target last year, Jeremiah Smith.
Who knows where Florida finished in that one? Anywhere from 2nd to 9th. Nobody really knew what was going on there. But you're right. And then you beat FSU and you would beat Miami. Don't forget about Miami. They hosted Vernell Brown III too, and would love to have him. And they've got some recruiting momentum right now, and we think probably more coming, unfortunately, for Florida fans. So to me, it all revolves around him. Corey, you agree or disagree there?
No, for sure. I'm definitely with Keith there. I think Vernell Brown, I think that's obviously the guy, 5-star kid legacy. I mean, obviously a fan favorite. I mean, getting him in the class, if everything kind of goes as planned with that and Florida is trending up how we think they are, I think that'd be a big statement pickup kind of going into the season. And I think overall too, when you look at that, I think that can get momentum. We all know what one commitment can do in recruiting, especially I feel like if he does pick Florida, I think social media, there's going to be a lot of nostalgia, a lot of fans, a lot of Florida fans. There's going to be tons of stuff on there. So I think he's obviously number 1 for me. And then Hilton Stubbs, who's committing here in the next day or two on 4th of July. Right now, it's not looking good for Florida, though. Miami's the heavy favorite right now. We know NIL is playing a big factor there. And it's a very interesting recruitment because early on, Florida was trending heavily. He went to USC, committed on that visit. And I think a lot of us knew deep down, like, hey, that might be the leader right now, but I don't expect him to sign with USC later in the year. So he reopens this recruitment, and he even said, hey, I think this might be crazy all the way up until December. And, all the in-state schools are in the mix. You could obviously take other OVs. And here we are, not even a month later, I believe a little over a month, he's going to be making a second commitment. And I think for Florida, if you do lose out for a second time with him, that's just kind of a stinger just based off the words he said in the past. How, Billy Napier was his best personal relationship for a head coach. We know how familiar he is with Will Harris and everyone in Gainesville. So that, if that goes, that trajectory is planned, he picks Miami. Yeah, that's kind of a stinger for Florida. So I think either way, if he does pick Miami, I think he'll probably still go out and take visits. It would probably surprise me if he's not at the week 1 game in the Swamp. I think even as a Miami commit, Florida's going to keep recruiting him. So I still believe his recruitment still might be kind of crazy up until December. So I think Florida will keep their attention on him. But I think those are the first two guys that come to mind. Donovan Olugade, the receiver at IMG, he's announcing here soon the next couple of days, but Missouri's kind of trending right now. We know Chad Simmons put in a prediction for him. And I kind of always thought Florida and Missouri are kind of the two dark horses right there. And I knew Missouri with how their offense, I thought with them getting the last OV, that could maybe put them into that, that top category. So we'll see, man. I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were saying. Florida obviously is in the mix for a lot of these big name recruits, but unfortunately, other than Vernell Brown, they're kind of slipping a little bit with some of them.
There's a couple other defensive backs we're watching too that could have July decisions. Bryce Fitzgerald out of Miami, Christopher Columbus, Ben Hanks Jr. out of Miami, Booker T. Washington. Those are guys that are looking at both 4-star guys, by the way. Fitzgerald's a safety. Ben Hanks is a cornerback, and Hanks' dad obviously wore number 11 for Florida as a linebacker in the early to mid 1990s. But they're going to have decisions probably late July, early August. I feel better about Florida's chances with Bryce Fitzgerald of the two right now. So there's going to be a bunch of guys deciding. And then also, here's the other thing. Florida is going to start the board is going to shift, okay? New names are going to emerge. Corey had a big scoop today that Carday Smith, the former Auburn offensive line coach, Corey, I'm stealing your scoop here, is probably going to visit Florida. Now, we don't love their chances right now, but that's what a visit would do. They're going to be circling back. They're going to be looking at other schools' commit lists, and they're going to say, who are some guys that might be poachable? And, okay, look, it's not what you necessarily want to do, but we all know that the Illinois, Arizonas, Kansases, and NC States of the world have guys that are going to be playing in the NFL. They have good guys. They have to really evaluate. I mean, I know people love to think that their school is always the best at evaluating. It seems like Florida does a pretty good job at that, a very good job at that, in fact, in many areas. But those schools can't go fishing from the big pond. They got to fish from the other pond, which means they got to do some hardcore evaluating.
Yeah.
Their whole program is built on evaluating because the logo itself isn't going to land anybody. So you start looking at guys like that and you say, okay, who's poachable? Who from what they've got committed is a guy that can play in the SEC? And so it's not panic button time, but I don't think, it's going to take a lot of work to have a class that's in that top 10, top 12 range that Florida fans have come to expect. I think that's the best way to put it together. They're going to put together a solid class regardless, but the question is it going to be 15 to 20 range with a couple difference makers, 12 to 15 range with 3 or 4 difference makers, or in that top 10? And Vernell Brown gives you some hope of a top 10 being a 5-star, but there's a lot of work ahead. It more than likely will be outside the top 10 at this point, unless Florida just goes crazy on the football field. Like you wouldn't imagine. So,
yeah.
Speaking of Illinois, who's put more DBs in the NFL as of late than Illinois? Like, honestly, they put about 5 or 6 in the first 3 rounds in the last 3 years. So, like he said, I mean, there's plenty of talent out there, especially in Florida. So we'll see kind of where they go from here.
No doubt. Now, we've already gotten to some of these top targets here and decisions that are coming up. I want to get into some more because, we highlighted the most important ones coming up, but there's a lot of guys getting ready to decide or just have things kind of happening in their recruitment. And we're learning more about how things are evolving. I do want to have you guys react to the latest news this week with Wallace going to Arkansas. A bit of a surprise decision nonetheless. I think all along we felt that leading up to it that Florida wasn't going to be the front runner here, and that obviously proved to be the case. But he just decided to leave the Florida schools out of it completely. I think FSU was the one that really seemed to have trended toward late, but he goes to Arkansas, and a bit of a shocker there, right, guys?
Yeah, no, I think overall, I mean, I had it Florida and Florida State, and Keith was hearing early in the day that there was some kind of uncertainty as far as exactly where he was going to end up. I didn't hear much on the Florida end. I reached out to someone, and they still thought it was going to be FSU. They didn't believe it was going to be Florida from who I spoke to. But yeah, that for me, that was kind of the surprise of the cycle so far. Right when I saw that, you can see when Hayes Fawcett put out that tweet, it just blew up like wildfire. So I think with Florida, I think it's more of a stinger for Florida State, just considering he just said Florida State was the leader a few days ago. He's been there a countless amount of times. I still think, obviously, it sucks for Florida. He grew up liking Florida. I just didn't. He said all the right things for Florida. He's been there a few times. You could tell, obviously, his dad loved the Gators throughout his life, too. I just didn't think it was going to be enough to kind of put them over the top, just based off where the program is right now. If Florida's coming off, a very successful season. They led into their recruitment like that. I thought maybe something could have been different, but kudos to Arkansas. I didn't have Arkansas on my paper. I didn't think they're going to win out, but that's recruiting for you.
It just goes to show you that even in this day and age, relationships do matter. And, so a lot of people were like, well, the bag must have been huge, the NIL. Well, it's my understanding that the NIL was comparable to what the other schools were putting up. And so, the coach that recruited him to Arkansas, a guy named Travis Williams, I know him because he played at Auburn. He coached at Auburn. He coached at UCF for Gus Malzahn. He actually recruited Tavion's brother 4 years ago, Tavon Wallace, who was just now third-round draft pick out of Kentucky and is playing in the NFL. And so that relationship, he knew the family well. He knew the younger brother well, Tavon, who's now 6'1.5", 210 pounds, big-time four-star recruit. And that really allowed him to get his foot in the door. The question was, we mentioned that Arkansas, we mentioned that relationship, and that's why he was visiting Arkansas. But and neither did any of the other schools recruiting him, thought that was really going to be a place that he ended up. So that's where the surprise came from. The surprise, it's not a surprise that he would play for this coach, Travis Williams. I think the surprise was that it was Arkansas. Because, again, Florida State thought maybe Georgia or Florida was the toughest competition. Georgia thought it was them and FSU. Florida thought it was them and FSU. And none of them were talking about Arkansas. And, somebody at Arkansas told me that one of the coaches involved in this recruitment actually, told the family, why are you visiting Arkansas? Like, they didn't understand. They didn't know the dynamic in play there. And that ended up being the big deal. Now, the question is the Arkansas staff going to save their jobs? Okay. Are they going to be there after this season? So that's something to watch too. Now, I will say this, if the Arkansas staff loses their job and if Travis Williams ends up as a defensive coordinator somewhere else in the SEC or the ACC, you could still see this young guy go with them. They're that close. So, but it was definitely, nobody just thought that Arkansas was going to go into Southeast Georgia and get a kid that Georgia wanted. Georgia absolutely wanted this guy. FSU absolutely wanted him. Florida absolutely wanted him. So it was, on the one hand, very much a shock. On the other, maybe we should have seen it as more of a possibility than it was because of the relationship.
Well, the one good thing for the Gators, they didn't get hit with the hat switch. He did it to FSU in Georgia, but he left the Florida hat down.
Yeah, the only thing is, does that mean they finished fourth? Do you know what I mean?
I don't know.
Did they finish second or fourth because of that?
Well, then you look at, okay, where does Florida turn from here at linebacker? We've got a list that we put up yesterday. Miles Johnson's the guy Corey's been talking about a lot and may have some more information. Committed to Alabama, but he committed to the old Alabama staff, not Kalen DeBoer's staff. The communication hasn't really been strong that we know of. He's kind of been quiet of late. He could have a decision any day now. And if he's going to flip, it very well could be Florida. So that's a guy we're going to be watching. Ty Jackson's the number one linebacker in the country for On 3. Florida's heavily involved with him. He's visited Florida half dozen times now. Several times. Excuse me. I don't know if it's a half dozen. The question then is, when might he decide? Now, he's going to wait it all out. Now, this is a guy, if you do have a good season, yes, definitively, that's going to help Florida, because he is, his father told us he's not going to have a decision, his son, until probably December. So that gives Florida a real opening, and they'll be back for the Miami game. But, you'll keep recruiting Tavon Wallace. But again, the linebacker board, like some of Florida's other boards, I think we're going to see some new names emerging.
No doubt. Corey, who are some linebackers that you feel like Florida fans should be on the lookout for?
I think those are the main ones, man. And then, like, Christian Gass is another one. Georgia, Covington, Georgia. So I think he's another one right now Florida loves. He's near the top of the board. But that one's kind of trending the other way. I know USC's in a good spot. Georgia's in the mix. Tennessee. I think early in the summer and throughout the spring, Florida I thought was in a better spot. But it's kind of what I expected. They got an OV early on. Some other schools got on my campus that, just to be frank about it, they're probably in a better spot where the program is right now. And I know – this kid, I always thought he was going to play in the SEC, but it's been kind of fluid at the top of his board. I just think right now he's a kid Florida would love in the class. I just don't see it happening. I think Miles Johnson is probably the most realistic right now. Like he said, he's kind of went off the radar the last couple of weeks. I know he's not really taking many interviews, not really talking about his recruitment, but he said after that Ole Miss visit, which was right after Florida, that he's going to re-huddle with the family, talk about the pros and cons, and come to a decision at some point in early July. So here we are. I know with Ole Miss, I spoke to someone up in Oxford that felt they were in the mix. They felt like, it's fairly close between Florida and Ole Miss, but someone told me they still think the Gators have the slight advantage. And I think a lot of that has to do with the multiple visits he took to Gainesville. And I think another big thing too is, remember, he's committed to Alabama. And he's still technically committed, but, conversations are very minimal. There's not much contact between both parties. And I think him feeling like a priority the second time around is very important, considering how everything happened with Alabama. So, on that OV with Florida, he arrived at the football facilities in Billy Napier's personal car. I'm sure that must have felt pretty good, just considering how everything's been with Alabama. But then Ole Miss was another great visit too. So we'll see. I think, like Keith noted, I think it could happen any day now. And I haven't heard anything change. I still give Florida the slight advantage over Ole Miss based off what I'm hearing.
And then go ahead, Keith. Keith, you're on mute.
Did the same thing Corey did. You're going to have to. So I've got some construction above me. I had it on the dang thing on mute. You got to figure that for Florida losing Tavon Wallace on Tuesday, do they ratchet it up? Do they ramp it up a little bit on Miles Johnson? I mean, they need some wins. They know this, right? They know this. And so maybe he gets a little bit more attention moving forward. But, I mean, this is a guy they've liked. I mean, he was hurt last year, and I think Alabama had some concerns about the injury. But Florida says this guy's 100%. He's running fast. He looks good. I mean, I think Corey's seen him. I mean, the body's there. It's an SEC body. So Miles Johnson's a guy Florida likes a lot. I believe they would probably take him and be happy to have him. So,
well, I would encourage you guys, if you want to learn more about Florida's linebacker board, go to GatorsOnline.com and read our latest on that. And of course, everything that we've got going on the recruiting front. It is a busy time with decisions coming up. And I want to give you guys the opportunity, as we do each and every show, to take advantage of this promo that we got strictly for the listeners of the Geo Recruiting Show and the Gators Online Show. If you go to sign up at Gators Online and you're not subscribed, you can put in the code UF1 and get 2 months of access for just $1. Pretty much know exactly what's happening on these decisions before they come out and where the Gators stand based on all the intel that Corey and Keith are getting. So make sure that you guys are subscribed to that, all of their content coming up. And as promised, before we get out of here, we've been talking about all these top targets, these different positions. We've got to get into the quarterback spot, probably the most important one in terms of what fans want to know about what's happening. Tramell Jones, the FSU commit that Florida had been pursuing, had came out this past week and basically shut down his recruitment, saying that he's sticking with the Seminoles. The Gators have already sent out a new offer. There's some other targets that they're looking at. What's the latest on this, guys, that you can share? I know you can't give away all the juice yet, but what can you tell Florida fans about where things stand on the quarterback front?
I mean, they're evaluating a bunch of guys. They offered Bryce Baker last night, the North Carolina commit. We mentioned him a couple weeks ago, or we said that they were communicating with the Power 5 quarterback. I didn't want to put that out yet, but that's who that was. That's one of the main guys. He seems to be pretty locked in with North Carolina. I talked to somebody in Chapel Hill last night after Florida offered, and they said, hey, they're not worried at all. I mean, remember, they just put a quarterback in the first round. So, but Florida's kind of trying to, I don't know what the word is, sniffing around a little bit to see what's out there. They've also been talking to Ty Summers, a TCU quarterback commit. I do not expect him to land at Florida. And quite frankly, they're looking at some other guys. They're talking to a kid that's committed to Georgia Tech. They're talking to a kid that's committed to Old Dominion out of Pensacola. So they are going to be covering all their bases. They're certainly going to circle back on some guys. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. They're going to see how the season develops. Do any kids rise during the fall? I mean, they knew this was going to be a challenge. This is the problem when you have a quarterback that you sign that's a five-star guy that gets all the hype that DJ Lagway's got and that gets the $1 million type NIL deal. It is going to scare people away. So they knew that was going to be a challenge, and that's the slippery slope there. But they're going to keep working on some guys, and those are sort of the main guys I'm watching right now.
Yeah, no, I think Keith covered it perfectly. Yeah, it's kind of a wait and see right now. Just kind of and we all, like Keith said at the end of that, we all know that it's going to be a really weird cycle, just considering how good you did the last cycle with DJ Lagway, and then you mix in with just where Florida is right now. And like we know it all on the show, kind of a wait and see with the program to see how they play in the fall. So when you combine those two, I'm not really too surprised that, Florida's still without a quarterback at this point. And I also think they can also go the portal route. I think they can also go for maybe a kid that, was used to be highly recruited that maybe hasn't seen the field yet, that has several years of eligibility left, or they can get a kid at a smaller school who obviously has been successful, who's willing to come in and compete with Lagway. So I think they have some options. I don't think there's a real they're not in too much of a hurry. Like you said, not all the offers are valuing kids without extending offers. So I don't think Florida's in a hurry. I think they have options. They can turn the portal. So it's just the nature of the beast when you have one of the best quarterbacks join your program. If you're a quarterback, you're kind of looking at that. So we're keeping tabs on it, but it's kind of a wait and see right now until some more offers get handed out.
Well, and I do think it is an issue. I absolutely do, because if you look at Graham Mertzley, so you're looking at the quarterback room right now, and it looks pretty good. But when Graham Mertz is gone, then all of a sudden you've got, and DJ Lagway is your number one guy. Clay Millen will be back. Is he going to be your number two guy? Where's the other depth coming from? You say, oh, you can go in the portal, but what good quarterback in the portal is going to go to Florida when they know that they're going to be the backup and they're not going to have any chance to be the starter? So
it's really a miracle that they got Millen on the roster.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to have to hope that DJ Lagway stays healthy, and that maybe if Clay Millen, is he going to say, well, I'm not going to win this job. Is this where I want to be? I mean, we don't know what the future holds. You've got to land somebody. Yes. Otherwise, it's just going to be, you're going to find a backup from the portal. And then you say, okay, well, how many kids out there are going to say, well, I'm going to leave my situation where I'm a starter to be a backup somewhere else. So you're not going to get a starter. Okay. Even if it's at Miami of Ohio, you're not going to get a starter. But what you might get a young guy that sat somewhere for a year somewhere else. Like we just saw. Well, I don't want to use that example, but you might get a young guy that sat somewhere else and says, well, I'm going to have to sit here a couple years, but if I go to Florida, I'll have to sit a couple years. However, I know DJ Lagway is going to be gone after a couple seasons. So that job after that, then all I have to do is beat out a 2026 quarterback. And right now it's Will Griffin. So to me, that might be the route you have to go. You find a young guy that says, man, I'm already sitting, so what's another couple of years? And then the job is basically mine. All I have to beat out is one guy. And that might be the situation they're going to have to go in, because I don't see how they would get a quality veteran. I mean, why? Nobody wants to go somewhere for their last year just to be a backup.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it, Keith, Will Griffin. That's important to note, because you do have a top-flight quarterback committed for 2026. So like you said, if you got a guy that can come in and at the very least be a backup to DJ, you've done a good job. But now you got to go find that guy. You got to have a quality backup. It's not about individual players. And this is one reason Florida thinks it's going to be better this year. Zach, you know this better than anybody. They feel like their rooms, their QB room, their running back room, they feel like the rooms have been lifted up. Yeah. One guy doesn't do that. It's a whole. It's the totality of a group. No doubt. Well, we're going to continue tracking it at Gators Online. All of the decisions coming up. There's a lot to follow. So make sure you guys stay locked. We'll be back with a new episode next week. Happy 4th of July to everybody out there listening. Make sure that you enjoy your holiday weekend, and we'll be back with you guys. For Keith Niebuhr and Corey Bender, I'm Zach Albaverdi. We'll see you guys next time.